Well, hello there, watching the press preview. A first look at what is on the front pages. In the next half hour or so, then, we'll see what's making the headlines with the editor of the Politico London Playbook, Alex Wickham, and the editor-in-chief of Open Democracy, Mary Fitzgerald. Super to have you both on. Great to see you. As ever, though, front pages, first of all, starting with The Guardian. It reveals that an Ofsted request for greater powers to investigate abuse in private schools was rejected by ministers. The Metro reports a police watchdog has found that officers acted properly in dealing with the crowd which gathered in South London for the vigil to honour Sarah Everard. According to the Daily Telegraph, the leaders of France and Germany have spoken to Vladimir Putin about acquiring some of Russia's COVID vaccine stock. Meanwhile, the Eye has spoken to one of the co-creators of the AstraZeneca vaccine, who says the UK does not have enough capacity to manufacture vaccine doses. That's despite an announcement earlier this week from Novavax. The Daily Mirror leads on the record-breaking March temperatures, with sun seekers urged to stick to social distancing measures. The Daily Mail reports on the major review into British society, which was commissioned in the wake of the Black Lives Matter protests. It finds the UK is not an institutionally racist country. That is also the lead story for The Times. Diverse UK hailed over narrowing of race gap, their headline. The Sun, meanwhile, hears from retired footballer Thierry Henry about his decision to leave social media, owing in large part to racist abuse. And the Financial Times leading with an investigation by regulators into the sell-off of shares in a capital management company to see if any of the banks involved acted inappropriately. So let's get the thoughts, the choices of Alex Wickham and Mary Fitzgerald. Hello again to both of you. And to the racism inquiry we go first. The two papers that we're leading on are the Daily Mail and the Telegraph. It'd be interesting to see some of the other newspapers take, maybe when we get the insides. But the Daily Mail says that this landmark report shows that the UK is, in fact, a model to the world on diversity and finds no evidence of institutional racism. This may well go down rather controversially tomorrow, Alex.
Absolutely. This is definitely going to be the main news of the day. In Westminster tomorrow, it's the report by the Race and Ethnic Disparities Commission that was set up by Boris Johnson in the wake of the Black Lives Matter movement last summer, which reports tomorrow and has come some really quite eye-catching conclusions that, as you say, will be very controversial. The report says that Britain is actually not at all an institutionally racist country in any way. It says that Britain is, in fact, the model for white majority countries in terms of the lives of ethnic minorities who live in this country. And it uses the example of education mainly as to make its argument for this. It says that children from ethnic minorities are more likely to do well at school than white British children. Obviously, this as you can imagine, this is going to be a pretty incendiary report that sparks a lot of feeling tomorrow. And we've only just got the first few extracts of it coming this evening. I think it'll be really interesting to see how this goes down, because we saw the outpouring of feeling last summer in this country through the Black Lives Matter movement. Some may say that this report is really glossing over and taking a pretty positive view of things in this country, and not perhaps getting into perhaps some of the issues in the criminal justice system that we may see, and how that impacts ethnic minorities, with its focus on education instead. And I think, unfortunately, I fear we might be going down that little culture wars road again, where there's a little bit of a divide opens up, and we'll already see it coming out on Twitter, I'm sure, in the next few hours. Are you on the side of, Britain is an open and tolerant and fantastic country with no problems, or really very limited problems on racism, as this report says, or is it actually that there are issues and this report has overlooked them?
Yes, and I mean the timing is interesting too, isn't it? Just at the start of the former police officer accused of murdering George Floyd, you know, that's what sparked it all at the beginning, wasn't it? But you're right, there is a sense of the rosy glow in the Daily Mail. Commission Chairman Tony Sewell said the UK had progressed into a successful multi-ethnic and multicultural community, which was a beacon to the rest of Europe and the world. Also finding that children from many ethnic minorities do as well or better at school than white pupils, which was creating fairer and more diverse workplaces. Telegraph as well, racism not always to blame for inequality. I think, you know, everyone will digest this and take whatever they need from it, but the headlines here will really disappoint some people in black, Asian, minority ethnic, a term also, BAME, that they recommend not using. They'll be disappointed, won't they, do you think, Mary?
I think so. I think particularly some of the stories that we're going to come on to look at, it very much depends on your perception and your experience. So the report highlighted how historic cases have created a deep mistrust amongst certain communities, and doesn't attempt to gloss over that fact at all. And of course, headlines don't give much room for nuance, do they? I think that it's quite interesting that, you know, the Daily Mail splashed with race revolution, which can mean so many things, but that they were, you know, trumpeting Britain as a multicultural, multi-ethnic success. You know, as the Telegraph said, of course, race is not the only cause of socio-economic inequality and problems. And I don't think anyone on either side would claim that. So as Alex says, it's useful to have some nuance and perspective. And as we see the debate heat up on Twitter in the coming hours and days, perhaps not to fall completely in one camp or the other. But to listen to the nuance and the complexity of the subject that's being discussed here. Well,
as you said, it's not published yet. 264 pages. It will definitely be an interesting read. But as you said, we go on to The Sun, which is Thierry Henry, the legend, as The Sun describes him, who's decided to take a stand on social media, partly over racists and bullies, he says. Tell us more, Alex.
Yeah, this is Thierry Henry, the former Arsenal footballer, who's given a really quite an extraordinary interview to The Sun about why he's had to close down his social media accounts, because he feels the level of racist abuse that he's getting is just something that he shouldn't have to put up with anymore. And this is, you know, he's really just the latest footballer in a long line who's had to deal with this on Twitter. I mean, you know, every weekend at the moment in the Premier League, footballers are, you know, if they lose a match, black footballers are getting huge amounts of racist abuse on Twitter, and there seems to be very little that anybody really is trying to do about it. And you know, there are two things at play here. I mean, football in the Premier League is obviously a global sport, not just an English sport, and there are fans across the world, many of whom who are responsible for some of this racist abuse. And you know, many people in the Premier League would argue, certainly, well, there's not much that maybe we in this country can do about some of that. But no doubt a lot of the racism and the bile on Twitter is coming from people in this country as well. And there are real questions for social media companies to answer over what they're doing about this. And this is one of the key findings in the report, which is that, you know, while there may be, the report argues at least, many improvements in terms of racism in this country over the last few years, one area where things have got worse is online, and the fact that, you know, there is just a huge amount of awful racism on social media that the social media companies are doing nothing about. So I think we could probably expect to see from the government over the coming weeks and months more pressure on social media companies to try and clamp down on this, and this Thierry Henry interview will be probably just the start of that.
Yes. So the rights of ethnic minorities then in that report, the rights of women to reclaim the streets or wherever was part of the Sarah Everard vigil, was it not, Mary? Take us to the Metro, which is that the police actually were not or did not operate inappropriately that night. Tell us more about their front page.
Yeah, so an independent body has found that police acted appropriately in their policing of the vigil. And while it concludes that there was too little communication between officers, that they acted entirely appropriately and within the law, and the police union has hit out at, you know, armchair critics of policing tactics. I mean, that stands at odds with the photographs and the footage you're showing right now. And this independent report does note that the vigil was a PR disaster for the police in no uncertain terms, but argues that actually the police acted completely inappropriately and within the law. And again, here I think that there's a question of trust and perception which goes to the heart of this, which I think this report somewhat ducks. The context in which people understand the policing to have taken place and to have happened, and what they see on their screens and on social media is part of what needs to be considered here, because policing is by consent, and police need to build trust within communities in order to be able to police effectively.
Yes, and the suggestion was from many people still that the police could have handled this differently. This was a vigil in protest about the way that women were treated after a serving police officer was accused of murder. The juxtaposition of all of that made this difficult scenes to watch, I suppose, Alex.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think there was polling that came out in the wake of the events at Clapham Common in the week afterwards that showed that a lot of the British public, most of the British public, were pretty uncomfortable with the actions of the police and thought that they were heavy-handed. So whatever this report has found, I'm not quite sure the police have the confidence of the public on this. I mean, one thing that I found particularly sinister, really, in this report that came out from the inspector today is that the thing that they seem most concerned about was that lots of people on social media were saying that Cressida Dick, the Metropolitan Police Chief Commissioner, should resign, and she'd handled things so badly, and the police were way over the top. And this report says all of these people on Twitter and journalists and politicians who were saying that she should resign were the ones that to blame for the police's reputation with the public worsening. Well, I mean, it's a bit strange that the police, not only did they want to shut down this vigil, it now seems that they want to sort of shut down pretty mild criticism and pretty standard journalistic behaviour and behaviour of politicians, and slightly worrying that the police would want to protect their own in such a way and try to sort of close down what is really an absolutely necessary political debate about how policing in this country works. I think that is, for me, the main takeaway from this report, which I think, again, it shows is another example of, as the report says, a bit of a PR disaster from them.
Yes, that's interesting, because the police were saying, at least hear our side of the story before you comment. I suppose that was their criticism towards politicians, from what I heard today. Plenty more still to come, including Emmanuel Macron and Angela Merkel turn to Vladimir Putin for help with the COVID vaccine. We'll have more on that after this break. Mary, let's go to the Daily Telegraph, shall we now? Their lead story is that the French and German governments look to be turning to the Russians for their vaccine, Sputnik V, which, to be fair, has been very well reviewed. But for me, this has got all sorts of geopolitical interest that they go there. What's the Telegraph saying about this?
Well, I mean, it's vaccine diplomacy, isn't it, on Putin's part? This is another engine of it's a diplomatic victory, really, for him. There's a sort of arms race around vaccines, and the Germans have decided, after reviewing the AstraZeneca vaccine, to halt it for the under 60s. So there's an opportunity for other suppliers and other world powers to come in and occupy the space that the AstraZeneca vaccine, which is, of course, one of Britain's great triumphs, to occupy. And so, yes, it's very much geopolitics, power play. Yes, the vaccine is had good reviews and is seen to be very effective. But it's interesting, this shift, and very notable that the Telegraph are reporting on their front page.
Absolutely. I mean, some nations, I think, like Hungary, have already gone there, haven't they? So it's going to be interesting to see how that goes down with Brussels and the rest of the European Union. In the meantime, Alex, let's move on to the Metro, she says. Guessing it is the Metro, I think, isn't it? What you can see on Google Street View. This is a good one, isn't it?
Yeah, this is easily the best story in tomorrow's newspapers, I reckon. incredible story of property hunters clicking on Rightmove to look at a £375,000 house in West Sussex. Looks lovely. 3 double bedrooms, south-facing garden. Absolutely brilliant. You click on a link on Rightmove to see where exactly it is. You click on and it takes you to the Google Street View. And what do you see? A load of armed police with machine guns raiding the property and arresting a load of people inside. Absolutely incredible scenes of what you see on Google Street View. I think people, when they're buying a house, quite often would think, well, why is the previous owner leaving? I think few would expect quite this to be the answer. The article finishes with the line, "A man was later jailed for possession of an offensive weapon, and a woman and a teenage boy were also sentenced for possession of a blade." So there you go.
There you go. I just want to know if they bought the house, but maybe not after that. Who knows? Alex Wickham, Mary Fitzgerald. We'll see you from 11:30. Thank you so much.